Hello and welcome. My name is Alanis Morissette, and my guest today is Dr. Sue Johnson, who's known for her innovative work in the field of psychology on bonding, attachment, and adult romantic relationships. Sue's the developer of emotionally focused therapy, EFT, and her decades of research are chronicled in her book, Hold Me Tight, and more recently in her book called Love Sense, as well as professional books which include The Practice of Emotionally Focused Couple Therapy, Creating Connection, and Emotionally Focused Couple Therapy with Trauma Survivors. It's my blessing to have her on the show with me today. So welcome, Sue. It is such an honor to be speaking with you. I just consider you to be such a holistic guide and teacher and leader and forefront runner on the front lines of the conversation of integrating brain and psyche and attachment and connection and relationality, the functionality of it, boundaries, all of it. I feel like you blend all of the things that I personally deeply care about, and you don't shy away from any elements of what the human condition is asked to allow and to vulnerably feel in order to have connection and to have that which we're promised as our birthright in terms of relationships on this planet. So bless you for that. You're such an inspiration to me. I love the idea of being able to speak with you. And just to start, so people can get to the sense of you, emotionally focused couple therapy is the model among many other teachings that you've shared with the planet through your work. Yes. And I was wondering if you could just in a short, long or medium, whatever you feel amount of time, could just share with people what the focus on emotionally, the operative word of emotionally focused couple therapy, how that differentiates you from perhaps some other models and other approaches.
I think for me, when I started off, I started seeing couples at a time in my life when I'd done all kinds of, I was finishing my doctorate and I'd done all kinds of other therapy and read all kinds of theories. And the only thing I hadn't really done was work with couples. And I guess rather arrogantly, I assumed that it would be interesting, but not very hard. And,
what could be so difficult about a relationship?
Yeah, I was really wrong about that. So I started working with couples and I was fascinated and enthralled and caught and completely overwhelmed and unsure of what I was doing. But one thing that was very clear to me right from the beginning was that this was a dance the couple were involved in. It wasn't about one person's issue or one person having anything wrong with them. I was fascinated with the interaction between the two people and how it seemed to create all this emotional music. And I was fascinated with the drama of the interaction. And I was very caught up in how the emotions drove that drama. But when I went back and looked at all the things that were just starting to be written about relationships, and because, it's taken science and clinical psychology a while to actually get what ordinary people know, which is that one of the most important things in life, if not the most important thing, is our relationships. And one of the biggest sources of our pain is when we can't make those relationships work. So when I went to that literature, it completely ignored emotion. In fact, it said emotion is the reason why couples are unhappy. They've got too much of it, or they don't talk about it, or they attack each other. So you have to get them out of it. You have to explain things to them. You have to get them to do cognitive skills and control their emotions and get them to think differently.
Do you think they perhaps were talking about the acting out of emotions? Like, were they perhaps trying to vilify the acting out of emotions and they weren't aware that emotions in and of themselves are great messengers and,
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that message was completely lost. I think they saw emotion as a problem and they saw it that it was somehow immature and it didn't get you anywhere. You couldn't solve problems with emotions. And what I saw with my couples right from the beginning, I didn't really know what I was doing at that point, but what I saw was when people went into their emotions and learned how to walk around in them and name them and learned how to accept them and actually share them with their partner, that the whole dance with the partner changed. The whole dance it just opened up this amazing space for people to start to connect on a different level. So when one person is angry all the time and proving the other person wrong, and the other person's moving away and shutting down and numbing out, you're completely stuck. Your dance together becomes very small and narrow, and you're terrorizing each other basically all the time with threats of rejection and threats of distance. And suddenly what I saw was if I helped people go into their emotions and accept them and talk about them differently, then suddenly that angry person would start talking about how desperate they were, how they were pushing their partner and poking their partner because they were desperate to get their partner to respond to them, because they felt so lonely and so scared that they weren't important to their partner, that maybe they weren't important to anyone. And when they started going into those soft emotions and that vulnerability and talking about it like that, the partner just leaned towards them. The partner was just pulled by that. I mean, I saw that and I thought, okay, really the emotion is the music of this dance, particularly between lovers. And what we've got to learn to do is learn how to understand this emotion, make sense of it, and then help people talk in this kind of emotional way, use this kind of emotional music to set up this dance. And what I didn't know back then was that, I sort of had it in my head. I was just trying to get people a little bit closer. But what I gradually understood over the last 20 years is that what I was really starting to do was get people into the space where they could learn to create these deep emotional bonds with each other, talk about their needs and fears in a way that really creates this incredible bond that we're all looking for in life. Once I started to get that, once I started to really put it all together and understand, my God, this is what this is all about. And the science of adult bonding only started getting going in about the beginning of the 90s. And once I started to get that that's what this is all about, then everything started to click into place for me. And I thought, my God, we're actually going into moments of disconnection, helping people keep their balance and turn towards each other again. And we are actually creating bonding moments.
And you're allowing people to create new points of contact, as you call it, outside of what their typical wheelhouse of interaction would be, based perhaps on their traumas or their history of how people interact in contexts of danger or trauma or whatever it is. So,
yes.
So you're creating, in some ways, you're rewiring the brain and the whole neuroplasticity of helping the brain develop in a way that is informed by these new ways of bonding, these new areas of connection that have been outside of the sort of amygdala-driven danger zone that people often live in when they're stuck in strife and conflict, and they're stuck in their styles of attachment actings out. The avoidant that you write of so beautifully, the secure attachment is the lovely ideal. The anxious one, the anxious and the avoidant often couple up horrifyingly and beautifully, ultimately, if they push through with the kind of work that you're describing or the kind of inquiry that you're describing. So I'm excited at the idea that trauma being healed through this relational context, this relational model of whether it's with a therapist, a bond that's established through a therapist, when it's functional, it's, in my personal experience, it's been so lovely, but specifically in couplehood where we project onto our partners. And often, there's some element of our partners reenacting some old traumatic interactions from our childhood that trigger us. But that you're offering a new way to have points of contact and ways to connect to heal that severed or that ruptured bondedness that creates such loneliness and helplessness, which to me are the core elements of depression and anxiety and all the despair and unrest that we see around the world.
That's right. What you're touching on there is what has really emerged in the last 20 years in developmental psychology and in social psychology, and it really comes up in our work, which is the power of a secure bond with another person, the power of knowing that someone has your back, that you are precious to someone, that there's someone you can turn to if you're faced with danger and trauma and you're overwhelmed, that you stand in life holding someone's hand. We have only started to understand how deeply rooted that is in our bones, how deep this longing is, how this is like oxygen for us. Having someone that you matter to, that will come when you call, is the main survival strategy of our species. Love is an ancient, wired-in survival code. It's not just this mixture of sex and sentiment that people talk about these days as being about romantic love. It's much more significant than that. And you're touching on something very amazing, which is what we find in our work is that when we help couples create these bonding moments, they don't just expand their relationship into this area of depth and connection and support. What they do is they grow each other. They make each other stronger, more resilient. What grows anybody except the light of in somebody else's eyes? They grow each other. So we see our couples not only connect in ways that maybe they've never even connected with any human being before, and they start off distressed, of course, when they come to us.
I don't know anything about that. I don't know what you're talking about. What you're describing has the idea come to mind that the role of the therapist in this teaching, in this invitation that you're describing, as an ally, really, because if we're relying may not be the right word, but if we're looking to the light in each other's eyes in order to bring us basically back toward our wholeness and heal a lot of these ruptures that have kept us from the awareness of our innate goodness and wholeness and bigness, then on some level, if we're mutually traumatized or if we're mutually challenged or we're set up in that complementary, avoidant, anxiously sort of chasing roles that we're in, a little harder to access when in couplehood, when we're both triggering each other, the light isn't as quick to access. So the guidance, and I've had personal direct experience with my husband with EFT, and the invitation to look at things from a different perspective has our healing and growth happen in tandem. So to begin with, out of the gate, as traumatized creatures, if I can throw my husband and I crassly into that category, relying singularly on each other, we were both a little ill-equipped out of the gate. And then as we went along with this work that we've been doing around EFT, it's been really exciting because the invitation is to be healing together and working together. And as the light grows in both of us, it becomes this beacon for us both. And one thing that you named a moment ago, the value, I'm just noting the value of naming feelings in a relationship, but specifically in a conflict, is you also called it reappraisal, that process of sort of getting the distance or naming it to tame it, the whole idea of understanding emotions. What is the power, if you could describe the mechanism or the essence of the power of naming feelings and articulating them and becoming more emotionally literate what's the value for that, if you could explain that in your own words?
Oh, the word emotion comes from the Latin word immovere, to move. Emotion moves us. It's a motivating force. And it also is a way that our body has of just making sense of the world. So, when somebody says to me, I'm usually working with couples, sometimes I work with individuals and families, but, when somebody says to me, I don't know how I feel. I'm just numb. I don't know what to say to her. I don't have anything to say. I knew she was going to leave me. I've always known she was going to leave me. I don't feel anything. Or when somebody says to me, yes, I'm angry all the time. I don't even know why I'm angry. I don't go and say, well, let's look at the illogical thoughts that start you being angry, or let's do something different. I say, let's stay there. Let's stay there. Let's look at that. What's happening? What do you see on her face? What do you hear? What do you feel in your body? What does your mind say to you? What are the thoughts? What do you want to do right now? And he says, I want to run.
Yes. So
I say, you want to run? He says, yeah, I want to run. I say, oh, so you are feeling something. You're not just indifferent or numb or saying to her, you might as well leave me because I know you're going to leave me. You want to run. There's something here that's dangerous. He says, yes. I said, well, what is it? And he said, I don't know. And if you just help people stay there, he says, that look on her face, see the look on her face. I said, what do you see? He says, she doesn't want me. She's never wanted me. I don't think anyone wants me. Maybe there's something wrong with me. And then suddenly he starts to weep. And he says, I don't know why I'm weeping. What did I say? That's scary. And all I really do then is stay there and help him make sense of that and help him tell him how normal it is and how brave he is to open that door and how, of course, if he never had the experience of feeling really loved, then of course that's what he's going to feel when he gets stuck in a fight with his partner and she's angry with him. But see, once you help people make sense of their emotions, and there is some research on this. What's his name now? I can't remember all these academics' names. His first name is Matthew. I'll remember his last name in a minute. And what he found in a brain scan study was just helping people put this feeling together, this body sense and how your mind interprets it and the cue from the environment, just helping people put it together and name it gives them a sense of order, gives them a sense of control. Yes, I can make sense of it. And he says to me, yes, I want to run because I'm scared.
And some disidentification too. So there's that distance allows for some agency and some sense, you just said control, but some sense of being empowered to take an action on behalf of something as opposed to being completely bowled over by it, frankly, or immobilized. If that amygdala is going off of the fear and the danger, fight, flight, freeze, collapse, tend and befriend is a new one that I'm enjoying too. Like all of these response to danger and fear on an animal level precludes us from being able to actually take an action that's born from our frontal cortex of our brain that can think and plan and come up with answers that will integrate and create harmony. Everything that we say, on a conscious level, everything we say that we want. So that ability to disidentify, I mean, it's a deeply soulful and spiritual concept too, of being able to not overly identify with aspects of form or aspects of even emotion as a form, that the emotion is a message and it's to be heeded in our somatic, messaging system of our bodies. And yet at the same time, some distance from it does allow us to access that gorgeous logic that so many academics, there's great value basically in being able to take action on behalf of something that will move us toward consciousness and harmony versus keep us stuck in it. But they need to work together, right? It's not like avoiding all emotion is the answer, and it's not like living in logic, firstly, is even possible. But you got to it in the example you just gave, that even underneath the defense strategies of intellectualizing or logicifying or whatever it is that we do to try and avoid the more vulnerable feelings, especially in the patriarchy that the masculine in men and women alike are not allowed to feel these 12 top feelings,
And men often go into numbing, actually. I mean, he's into numbing. And when he's numb, he basically stays still and he doesn't do anything, which is completely pushing his wife away and leaving him helpless. But when he is able to put it all together, and as you said, it gives you a kind of, we call it a window of tolerance. It gives you an ability to look at it when you say the name. You are ordering it when you use a name, when you put a word on something, you're making sense of it. So when he's able to turn and say, I'm scared, I'm always scared that I'm going to hear that I can't please you and I'm not good enough for you. And I spend my whole life waiting for that message. And so I can't even come and dance with you, really, because I spend my whole life waiting for this rejection. And he's able to say that. And of course, at first, he's sad and it's hard. But then he starts to say, that's right. I'm someone who has a reason to be scared to be rejected. And that's where I live. And what I need from you is reassurance. And see how empowering that is then. So in just 10 to 20 sessions, I think because we've worked on this a long time, and right now, at this point, we're pretty on target. We kind of really know how to set this up. In 10 to 20 sessions, he can move from being shut down, withdrawn, lonely, pushing his wife away and numbed out into a person who's able to turn to his wife and say, I don't want to be so afraid all the time. I need your acceptance. I need to know that you love me. When we get stuck in these arguments, I need you to hear me when I say I'm overwhelmed and give me a bit of space and then help me turn back to you because I do want to be close. I'm just somebody who has this raw place in me that's scared of rejection. And I want to be able to bring that to you. And I want your help with it. And when you see people do that, not only does their relationship change, but their image of themselves changes.
And the world.
Well, okay. Can you imagine if we could all do that? And of course, we're talking about a romantic bond, but the other bond that we're all very aware of is all this theory about adult bonding came out of the original work on the bonding between mother and infant that happened in England in the 1970s, John Bowlby. And of course, if we could do this in our parenting, can you imagine?
Well, we can. And it's right, teachers like you who inform us more and more about attachment parenting. I mean, one of the things I found in being a very outspoken advocate on behalf of my version of attachment parenting was that I ran into this misperception a lot that high responsivity and accessibility and proximity and attunement from me toward my son in this case would, I was told that it would somehow create clinginess in my child, and that my experience has been the total opposite. The more securely connected I have felt with my son, the more I notice he's quick to explore and feel safely connected enough to go out into the world and to have this sense of separateness and being different and being differentiated slowly but surely, and that the survival is actually being most ensured by the degree to which he's been nurtured and connected. It was tough just to have that kind of an answer on some of the talk shows or whatever it was with limited amount of time to get into the details of this.
Alanis, that is so important.
It feels so important because it's the great misperception that, the coddling of the child, so many terms that were coined probably in the 50s and 60s, and well-intentioned parents, right? They want to create this sense of independence in their children, but what they're coming at it from a different angle, a different direction that actually creates insecure bond to the point where these kids are growing into older kids and eventually adults where they actually don't feel that bondedness enough to have agency and freedom and a sense of connection enough to go out into the world and be who they really are and contribute what they were meant to contribute,
I think that's one of the key things that has kept us from really understanding the nature of mother and child, parent and child, and romantic relationships, that we've been somehow taught that if you're a whole, strong human being, you leave vulnerability and needing other people behind at about the age of 12, and that what you're supposed to do with your kids is get them ready for that moment, when in fact all the research, and there's thousands of studies on this now, it's totally clear that if you want to create a happy, strong, confident child, then the best way you can do that is to be emotionally responsive to that child and teach that child that he lives in a universe where people will come when he calls, that he's precious, that he's special, that his world is understandable, that it's something he can manage, that his inner emotions are okay. We've made this terrible mistake, and I think my profession needs to take some responsibility for that. Psychology, psychiatry made this terrible mistake of believing that strong individuals are people who don't need other people and who can deny their vulnerability and stand alone. And now what we're starting to understand is, no, human beings are social bonding animals. They are not wired to stand alone. And denying vulnerability and our need for others is a weakness, not a strength.
And it also dysregulates people more. I mean,
right.
I think often about the difference between containment, which is just a mechanism by which you can actually organize a little more easily without being reactive, and suppression. And in my experience, the more suppressed these very innate, natural emotions are in our bodies, the more activation there is in the fight, flight, freeze department. So that's something you said a second ago. In defense, if I can even go there, in defense of people being afraid of what they might call coddling as not allowing their child to grow into being empowered and independent, quote unquote. All of that is in quotes. I think what they may be alluding to is their fear of the sort of over-empowerment or parentifying abuse that parents can have with children, in that the child is over-empowered to the point where they don't have a sense of integration and a sense of being able to connect and socialize well with people, and not having had limits set. So I think with attachment parenting and making sure there's a really high amount of attunement and responsivity, we're not saying that there's no limits being set for the protection and the safety of this child, or there's no limits or guidance being given around organizing how harmonious social interaction operates. And we're not saying that, basically, we're not saying that there's this limitless free-for-all sort of acting out permission being given to a young person. What we're really saying is that if the behavior of a child acting out or otherwise doing what is very typical for that age-appropriate period of time action, if there's a separation between the behavior that's being exhibited and the self. So if there can be a bondedness and a sense of connection with a child in this example, while they're having an appropriate, age-appropriate tantrum, we're helping them regulate, we're teaching containment, but we're not teaching the sublimation of the self. We're teaching that there can be some disidentification with behavior, and that certain behavior in certain contexts work and in other contexts don't work. But the self, the core self, is this precious, precious being, and that limits are there to serve the functionality of interaction so that these social connections can be maintained, as opposed to this isolation that creates all this depression and all the pain and needless suffering that we see in the world. So
that's right.
Yeah.
And, people make the same mistake when they think about adult relationships. People say things like, oh, well, I can't turn and ask. I had a man in my office the other day. We're starting to work with lots of heart attack patients because we're finding that if we improve their relationships, it really impacts their health behaviors and their health and whether they have another heart attack or not. So we're starting to work with them. And this man said to me, well, I can't turn and tell her that I'm overwhelmed and afraid when she gets angry with me, because she'll see me as pathetic and weak and codependent, right? And I said, could you possibly, could you possibly turn and look at her face right now? And because he's staring at the floor, of course. So he turns and he looks at her face, and I say, what do you see in her face? Do you see contempt and disgust? And he says, no. I said, what do you see in her face? He said, she looks like she loves me. I said, yes, because you're letting her in, and that's what she wants you to do. And being able to talk about your feelings, this is what she's wanted all these years. She says, I so respect you for being able to do that. It's strength. Not only that, but talking about your softer feelings and what you need is an assertive thing to do. We don't make couples into wimps. We make couples into people that can listen to their emotions,
be responsible for them too. Being able to articulate
say, this
them.
Is what I need.
That's mastery to me. That's hot.
That's right. That's a good word.
That's super grown up and admirable and warrants deep respect on my part when someone has the ability to articulate what they're feeling, take responsibility for it, express a need, be vulnerable for it, not feel entitled to it being met, but feeling touched by the fact that if it is met, what a great generous gift from my partner in this case.
Exactly. The research says that the more securely connected you are, and we're talking about people that are really close to you. We're not talking about, we are social animals. We need friendships. We need social networks. But we're talking about having few irreplaceable others. The research says that the more securely connected you are, basically, the healthier you are on almost every level. You're more confident, you're more assertive, you're more able to face risk and challenge. You deal with trauma better. If you do hit trauma, if you meet a dragon on the road, you're more able to deal with it. It goes on and on and on. It's like this knowledge that someone has your back, that you matter to someone else. We don't even need the other person there. We carry this around in us. I tell the story of how years ago I developed an airplane phobia, which was awful because, I was in the air.
It's not convenient.
No, it's really
for a traveling woman.
And, as a psychologist, I came up with 18,000 damn strategies for this. I had every visualization and every breathing technique and every new thought that you could possibly imagine. It wasn't working.
So that's the autonomous approach to it,
right? I'll deal with it myself. Right? So then what I did that really worked was I thought, wait a minute, I'll just think about my own work here. Why don't I read my own stuff? So then when the plane started to take off, I listened to my husband's voice in my head, because there is a sense, of course, that you, as adults, as children, we need our our attachment figures there to touch all the time. But as adults, we internalize them. So I listen to my husband's voice in my head. I trust that voice. Every neuron in my brain tunes into that voice and trusts it. And he would say, "It's okay, sweetie. You're not in danger. You're going to go up in the air, talk about all these things that matter to you, and then you're going to come home to me, and I'll be here." And my body would go, "Ah." And, this is what we do all the time. We talk to the people we love when we're driving in our car. When something's scary for us, we think about, what would this person say? What did everyone do in 9/11? Everyone called their partner, or the person that was most important to them. Everyone called their partner to cry and to say, "Did you see this?" To share, to be held. This is what we do. This is the source of strength for us. We are not wired to stand and face life alone. Basically, we just can't do it. We pay a terrible price when we try.
That was born from this autonomous movement. It's partly influenced by the feminist movement of having been dependent within a patriarchal context, beating ourselves up for the regrettability of all of that and thinking, well, I'm going to go to the other end of the continuum here. I'm going to be reactive, and I'm going to pretend I don't need anybody, and I'm going to pretend I can do everything a man can do, only better, quote unquote. And yet there was no love there. There was no sense of connectivity and relational harmony. It was actually quite lonely. And certainly a link in the chain that is huge for a movement away from patriarchy. God bless it. And at the same time, it wasn't a boon for the relational community or relationships in general. And so to return to this connection, something that I'd been on a personal level, I'd been dumped for and made fun of for this propensity toward being semi-obsessed with the idea of maintaining a sense of connection, even if it's not through physical proximity, even if it's through in the internalization that you just described with your husband on the airplane. Which leads me to another question, really, because there's two schools of thought that are pretty prominent. One is the must take responsibility for self and create some sense of inner parenting that is functional within us on our own time in our individual sense, combined with sort of couples work where it's very relationally based, attachment bond, rupture healing based, for lack of a better term. And so in some senses, in some ways, these two communities of models compete in a lot of ways. Some saying that the individual ability to self-soothe, ability to have some version of attachment correction within the inner parent and the inner children and the subpersonalities and aspects of self on an individual level is important. And then on a couple's level, there's a lot of thoughts around the idea that we're born in relationship, we heal in relationship, you can't do it on your own in an isolated manner, it's not possible, we're not wired to do that. So
even your brain is relational.
And then the answer to that from some of the more individual-oriented models has been, well, there are, and I believe this to some degree, of course, too. I think there's primary, secondary, whatever order they're in. I think if there's some element of my not being able to come to the table with my husband even without some sense of maturity, if I don't have the maturity when I come to the table, I'm leaning more on the therapist to be the ally, to be the guidance, to be the sort of maternal or paternal force in that sense. But I'm curious your thoughts on the church and state element of self-work versus couple work and whether they're complementary in some ways.
I think they're complementary, but I'm a little bit biased here. David Barlow is one of the greatest experts on anxiety in the world, and he spends his whole life writing interventions that teach people how to deal with their own anxiety. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But it's interesting because the piece of research that I thought was the most interesting, which he doesn't talk about much, but years ago he did a little experiment where he did his personal interventions for anxiety, to reduce anxiety. And then I can't even remember why he did it now, but for some reason he brought the partner in. It wasn't couples therapy. It wasn't couples therapy. He just brought the partner in and included the partner in the treatment. And the effectiveness of his treatment doubled. Okay, and I thought that was very interesting. I mean, of course, we need to learn how to regulate our own emotions. But by the way, we do that in relationships.
I was going to say, even the internalization of, in your case, your husband's face, or in my case, a wise therapist's empathic voice or whatever it is, it's still referencing or accessing relationality. And even if I do the subpersonality work or parts work or aspects of self, dialoguing with each other, so many beautiful models that extol the virtues of being able to disidentify from different parts and access self. Even when I'm doing that, it's still highly relational, even if it is in my imagination. Right. So the process of being able to internalize the initial caregiver or mom, internalize those voices and that warmth, and then for me, I have a lot of empathy around certainly my own self and then people I know who may not have experiences that they can reference. See, I'm thinking about the traumatized person that doesn't have experiences where they had a well-placed grandmother or an uncle or a teacher who was profoundly warm, right? Not even having that one reference point of someone who provided that for them.
Well, and that warmth is a key issue because there's a Canadian called Michael Meaney, and he does research on rats, and rats have got a pretty bad rap, I think, for us. But basically, he points out that rats' brains aren't actually that much different from ours. And what he points out is that the rats in a litter that have a mother that grooms them and cuddles them and cares for them and feeds them and protects them, their nervous system grows in a different way. It handles stress much better. It's much less reactive than the rats who are ignored or pushed aside or have a neglectful mother. It's like we've decided that life is all about the survival of whatever we call the fittest. And Darwin didn't even say that, by the way, but we decided that, when in fact all the research says that it's about the survival of the most nurtured. And so we learn how to make sense of our inner world and to regulate our emotions with other people. But in our society, we've become sort of obsessed with the individual, as if the individual ends at our skin. And another way of thinking about it, which my colleague, a scientist by the name of Jim Cohn, that I did a brain scan study with, what he talks about is, no, if you really look at the nervous system and the brain, what he suggests is that the bottom line for us, yes, we can learn to self-regulate. Yes, it's a good idea. But the bottom line for us is that we're co-regulating animals. We are born to regulate our emotions and our lives and our inner world with other people. And that actually what he says is that co-regulation, turning to another person, is much more efficient, works better for your nervous system than trying to regulate all your own emotions.
As if you can, as if you can. Right. So my question then becomes, what if you had someone sitting across from you who didn't have the reference point of that original warmth from a caregiver or a mother or a well-placed uncle in their trauma, and they're wanting to create this correction or this repair, this reconnection process? Where does one begin if they're traumatized to the point where they don't even have that pilot light glowing to the, you know what I mean?
I tell you what I've learned. The power of relationships is so strong. What I've learned is that very, very often, even in trauma, well, let me tell you, I remember working with a woman who had been massively abused and who was trying to connect with her husband, but her ability to trust another human being was pretty small.
Compromised, yeah.
Yeah, and so we talked about that, and somehow in the session, she got very upset and started to feel like she was very young and very helpless. And I noticed that she put her arm up in the air. She put her arm straight up in the air. Her husband was sitting in the session, and I said, well, what are you doing? And she says, oh, Uncle Harry. So you're saying if they didn't have an uncle, I'm suggesting there's almost always an image of somebody who was an island of safety. So I say, Uncle Harry? And she says, yes, he was a cousin. And for a short time, from the time I was about 8 to the time I was about 11, about every 2 months, he would come to the house for Sunday supper. And he liked me. And he would take me down to the store to buy me comics and sweeties. And when he took me down to the store, he would lean down from the sky. And listen, she's talking like a child. He'd lean down from the sky and he'd take my hand in his big, huge hands, and he'd hold my hand all the way to the store, and I would feel safe. And I'd say, that's your island of safety. And she said, yes. For some people, their image of God is an island of safety. For some people, it's a place that's an island of safety, or maybe a voice from a grandmother or a grandmother's face. People need something that has they've found comforting. The trouble is, if you've been really wounded and really traumatized and you've been violated in your vulnerability by the people you love, then it's a huge risk to turn and let other people in. And I think the best thing therapists can do, and people who love these people can do, is to understand what I just said, which is it's a huge risk. And people can't just turn and do it. They have to start where they're at. They have to start by, I've done a lot of work with people who've been very traumatized. They have to start by saying to their partner, my whole body says, I must never let anyone close. I'm not going to let you in. I can't let you in. If I let you in, I'll die. I'll collapse. I'll go crazy. I'm getting confused. I can't even stay here. What they're talking about is they're just going away. They're just becoming dissociated. And I've learned that if you just stay there and support them and help them slow down and order what's going on, it's the essence of mindfulness, actually. We've been doing it for years. We just didn't call it that.
It's also, I was going to say, it's the essence of parenting, like really lovely parenting too. So maybe that's the same thing, mindfulness and parenting.
Right. That's right. You just stay there and you say, let's stay there. This is what's happening. Can you tell him? What comes up for me is, it's too dangerous. I can't let you in. I'll never let you in. Well, of course, when she tells him that and puts it together like that, what does she do? She's starting to let him in. So, she doesn't have to change and do something different in order to have a relationship. She just has to be able to be where she's at. And all I do is help her turn and say this to her partner. Of course, I'm also there to make sure that the partner can respond in a way that doesn't wound her again.
What if the partner is not at their own development or their own growth to the point where they can? This is where the reliance on the therapist is tantamount, right?
Yes, and that's why you have to, when I work with couples, I love my couples, and we get to the point pretty fast where they trust me and they'll listen to me. So when somebody takes a huge risk, and the other person isn't present.
Let's say the other person completely blows it. Pours salt right back in the wound that's being addressed.
Right. I always knew you were difficult, and this just proves it, or something like that.
Or you do repulse me, or whatever.
Right. Well, what the therapist says is, stop.
Nice.
Stop here, please. And we turn and we help that person process what's just gone on. Could you help me? Because they missed it. They missed the cue. They missed their partner's vulnerability. Could you help me? Your partner just turned and said this. What happens to you? And
Nice.
I'm thinking about a particular man, and he said, there's no point in you telling me that. There's no point. I said, I'm sorry. Could you help me? Your partner just turned and said this. What happens to you? And he says, well, I can't solve that problem.
Yeah.
Said, you can't
That's probably a common one.
He said, no. I said, can we just slow down a bit? I don't think she's asking you to solve the problem. I think she's just asking you to be here. Maybe that is solving the problem because she's telling you how alone she is.
Well, that's a big one in the masculine-feminine exchange, whether it's in heterosexual couples or homosexual couples. I don't know if this is corroborated by biochemical science, but basically the desire to provide and protect, and part of providing is solution providing, and so that's a big orientation. But the integration of the masculine and feminine in the male or female body really does invite these other aspects of holding presence as a huge currency, as a huge piece of the provision. Modern times, what in stereotypical sort of heterosexual, what is the man providing the woman? Used to be, bring home the animal to give to the tribe. Right. And now it's kill something. Yikes. Now it's can I provide the act of staying present? This is what I would have loved from some caregivers in my past, is when I'm in distress, in despair, feeling sad, specifically for women, sadness, anger, and fear were big ones, big no-nos for me. So when specifically I'm in these feelings that are deemed by patriarchy, for lack of a better term, as being quote unquote bad emotions, can you stay here? Can you stay connected with me? Not try to solve it, but just stay here and then watch the magic and the metamorphosis of me moving through this. None of these emotions are bottomless.
That's right. And, it's so interesting because people don't get that. And I think it's one of the reasons why men respond to our therapy really well, because we try to help them get that. And it's like, you are the solution.
Yeah, you're the provider here. Yeah.
You just have to be here. Just your presence will do.
Yeah.
You know what it reminds me?
That's the new divine masculine credo that men in this context that we're talking about or the masculine providing is the sun. I liken it metaphorically to the sun. So you're just providing this warmth, this golden presence, this love, this empowerment. I mean, that's the providing of modern times from the divine masculine, So you were going to say something. I interrupted you. What were you going to say?
No, what I was going to say was the other passion that I have besides my family and my work is that I dance Argentine tango.
Ooh.
And
Sue, I never knew.
Oh yes, there's so many parallels, and it's because there's so many parallels.
Yes,
and
beautiful metaphor.
It reminds me of a time when I'd been dancing for a couple of years, and I've learned it's very difficult dance, okay, and I've learned all the moves and I've learned all the steps. And there was a guy that I didn't know, and he came into town, and he asked me to dance, and I danced. This is a complete no-no. You must never do this on the floor in tango. He stopped in the middle of the dance, which you're just not allowed to do, okay?
No.
And he said to me, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm dancing." Right? He said, "No, you're not." I said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "You're treating tango like it's a problem to be solved. Oh. You're off in your head predicting what I'm going to do, figuring out what you're going to do. It's all choreographed. You're trying to predict my every move, and you're not with me." And I said, "Right."
Whoopsie. Nothing to see here.
I said, "But isn't that what tango is?" And he said, "No, tango is all about attunement. It's improvised. There's no set steps, really. It's not like ballroom dancing. It's a PhD in attunement. Just stay here, listen to the music, let it come into your body, and be with me so you can feel the cues I'm sending. And just move with me. Just be present. That's what tango is." And I was like, oh, yes.
Wow.
And it's exactly the same with couples. It's like I'm saying to my couples, don't go off in your head and solve the problem. Don't go off in your head and decide that your partner's trying to do you in and come up with all kinds of scenarios. Stay here, stay here. Look at your partner's face. What do you feel in your body? Be present, be present.
Well, it's bringing them from the potentially traumatized past to this moment,
that's right.
into what's actually happening now, which is one of the hardest things to do, to come back into the moment and not have the flashbacks or the reenactments or the compulsion to repeat. That's a masterful invitation right there.
And people are afraid to do that. I think they think that the moment is somehow going to deliver some enormous blow. My experience is it never does. It's like, I say to a man, can you just stop with this run of ideas that you have in your head? And can you just stay here for a minute? And he says, no, if I stay here, I'm going to find out that I don't love my wife and I've fallen out of love with her and she doesn't love me. And, and I say, whoa, my goodness, can you just stay here and can you just look at your wife right now and you can just feel what you feel? Do you feel all these dreadful things that you have in your head? Do you feel distant and uncaring and, indifferent and how do you feel? He says, well, I don't know. And of course, his face starts to move and it starts to look like he's going to cry. I say, how do you feel right now? Never mind. And he says, I feel sad because I've lost her. I say, you feel sad. So wait a minute. You haven't just fallen out of love like it's a fact and there's nothing you can do. You're actually feeling sad because you can't find those feelings of love and you want them. Isn't that it? Because otherwise, why would you feel sad? And he said, yes. I said, good. Could you tell her, please? I feel sad because somehow I want the love we had and I don't know how to find it. Well, that's really different from I've fallen out of love and that's the way it is and love doesn't work anyway. It's like coming into the sort of emotional present has so many possibilities in it, but we don't trust it. We're scared. And if we haven't grown up in a family where we've been taught to trust our emotional experience, because that's really what secure attachment is. If we haven't grown up in a family where we've been taught that our feelings are valid and to trust our feelings and that we can trust other people with our feelings, then the next big opportunity to learn that is with our partner. So love is also, I think, about growth, that you're not just supposed to fall in love and walk off into the sunset. You're supposed to fall in love. And, no, you're supposed to fall in love and grow each other. You're supposed to like you.
And there's some growth and healing. And it's almost like the games begin, the rubber really hits the road after things start getting challenging, And I think for most people, not most people, probably some percentage of people who, when they start fighting, when they quote unquote, I fell out of love with you, and I just think, wow, that's really, I fell out of infatuation.
That's right.
And I'm, I don't know where to go next after this power struggle, this conflict, this pouring salt in each other's wounds based on our survival strategies.
That's right.
And that's where some guidance, and frankly, I mean, a lot of an amazing therapist in so many ways is really providing the quality of connection, the quality of consistency, limit setting, guidance, affirmation, knowledge. These are all things that ideally would come from the primary caregiver, in the many, many years at the beginning of one's life,
Yes. And the thing is, too, I believe in therapy. Good Lord, I've spent my whole life trying to figure out how to do it. And I believe that therapy is supposed to grow people. But what I see is that when you start creating these bonds, people's ability to heal each other is amazing. And one of the things I say to my students is, for a lot of people who've been traumatized, they have this sense of shame that bad things have happened to them because there's something wrong with them as people, right?
Yeah.
And what I say is, a really good therapist on a very good day has got a small 20-watt light bulb to shine down into somebody's pit of shame. The partner has a stadium floodlight.
Sweet.
And if you turn that floodlight on, that shame starts to get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller.
Yeah. And the role then in your EFT context is that the therapist is really supporting the couple in turning toward each other and and becoming the healing forces for each other. And one thing that I think we briefly may have touched on it, laughed about it at some point. I don't know where we were, but the idea in partnership where with sexuality, how connection and emotion affect the sexuality in a couplehood. The question that is begged around that topic for me is that a lot of people think, well, once the infatuation is gone, then the hot sex is gone. And my thought is in infatuation, is a biochemical response and it's procreatively, it lets the existential imperative of procreation continue on a body level, on an emotional level. It creates enough of a bond to begin with so that when stuff gets tough later, it gives us something to reference or an incentive to keep going, to recreate. But is it that the infatuation creates a bond? That's why it's so, can't get each other's hands off each other out of the gate. And then so many couples go, and then after the child or after a certain amount of time, it's not so sexy. But I've heard you say on an occasion or two that the hottest sex that is sex that follows a deep sense of connection.
That's right. All the research on bonding says that the people who have the best sex enjoy it most, relax into it, can play, choose to make love more often, are people who are securely bonded. So yes, that infatuation ignites oxytocin, which is a bonding hormone in your brain. Yes, all that happens. Sex helps us bond. But then it kind of goes in tandem. The more bonded we are, we disconnect from each other naturally in relationships. We have fights, we become distant. And then if we know how to create a secure bond, we reconnect. So it's almost like love isn't a constant, but there's a flow. So in a good relationship, we fall in love again, and again. And sexuality is part of that. But I think part of the tricky with sexuality is that just like we haven't understood love and bonding, we haven't understood sexuality very well.
Mm-mm.
And for me, the best definition of passion, which can come again and again and again, all through a long-term relationship, is that passion, really good sex, happens when attachment longing, the longing to be connected, is teamed up with attunement between the two people so that they can move together, they can coordinate this dance called sexuality, and then they can move into erotic play. And that's, for me, the definition of passion. And there's no reason on earth why you can't have that passion all the way through a long-term loving relationship. I don't think you can have it all the time. It's not, I think you can have lasting love, but I don't think you can have love every single minute.
Yeah.
Exactly when you want it. It's not a constant, but yes, and it goes with connection. Security. We've confused security with familiarity
and boredom
Yeah, they're not the same. Yes, it's an alive engagement. It's not a sort of numbed out familiarity.
No, because familiarity can have all kinds of tentacles to it, right? There can be contempt growing in there. It can be resentment that's sublimated. It can be.
But we get this very funny messages these days in the press that imply that you have to choose between one or the other. You have to have this sort of dull familiarity, sort of security, or erotic adventure. You can't have both.
Yeah, hot from infatuation to infatuation.
It's just nonsense.
It's a different quality, though. I mean, the kind of sexuality. Tell me what you think of this. The kind of sexuality that's born from the oxytocin infatuation. I just met you. You complete me. Compared to the quality of sexuality and passion that comes from connection being maintained, healing occurring, growth happening, high fives happening, that kind of partnership. There is a different quality of connection to that. Is that your experience?
I think so.
Yeah, I hope so.
But if I listen to my couples and to the research out there, the second one is better.
Way better.
It's deeper. Me. It's more resilient.
It's actually less. It's less. If I can just describe it somatically without getting into the more erogenous area, it's less piercing, it's less fear tinged, it's less terrifying.
It's not all about reassure me you love me. It's more about my goodness, you're hot. Let's play. yes,
and it's like the world is our oyster kind of thing. There's more freedom and warmth actually. So the infatuation is more piercing and got that fear of, are we connected? Is this going to last? Will I see you again? All of those versions of flings and sexuality. And then versus the warmth of we're together in this. And so let's go for it and investigate, Well,
and I think we forget, because we've looked at sexuality on the movies where everything happens in 2 seconds and is always perfect, right?
Well, it's all infatuation, or it's people who are bored with each other. I agree with what you said earlier. They've really only presented 2 versions of sexuality. It's the bored, resentful, kind of horrifying, boring sex, or it's the hot, infatuated, out of the gate movie sex. There has to be a third way, and I know Sue can talk about it.
Well, and we forget that actually, if you look at 2 people really making love, if you look at optimal sex, it's an amazing act of coordination. It requires attunement. It requires emotional responsiveness. It requires full engagement. And those are exactly the qualities that you have in a secure bond.
And connection.
Exactly the same.
And then specifically boundaries too, because I notice in my experience is that the more we're differentiated, the more there's a delineation between you and me, the more there's this yearning on my part, that longing you spoke of, to create the merge and then to move away and then to merge again, and that kind of back and forth of boundaryfulness combined with the merging of the spiritual oneness. The ocean drops move together into the ocean, they're one, and then they move toward little droplets again. And
that's right.
That whole metaphor of the idea of differentiation being hot because of what it portends for. It portends for the movement toward unification and union.
In the past, we haven't understood all the bonding stuff we're talking about. So I think in the past, we've really seen sexuality in terms of power and in terms of male sexuality. And, in the new research says that in particular for women, if you want a woman to allow herself to go into real arousal and to open the gates to her sexuality, she has to feel some sort of safety. Women's sexuality is amazingly sensitive to social context. Women know perfectly well the minute they're born that they're vulnerable, that they live in a vulnerable world. And here they are, they're naked with a much bigger animal.
Yeah.
And they're about to be penetrated by this animal.
So vulnerable. Even the physical act of opening oneself is the most vulnerable thing. And if you're in a context relationally where there's no safety emotionally, or there's violation of boundaries left, right, and center, or whatever it is, it's so physiologically counterintuitive to do anything that moves the person toward you when that person isn't safe.
That's right. And, so I think as this bonding science continues, and I think it will continue, it's only just started, we're going to know more and more about how to help more and more people have positive relationships. And we're going to understand how sexuality fits into those relationships, and personally, I think it's amazingly hopeful. Some people are very pessimistic about relationships. They say, people are divorced and yes and yet aren't. Maybe. But I think it's also true that we now have the freedom. Women don't have to stay in an unhappy relationship. Yes, there are more divorces, but hopefully, especially with this new science, there's also more and more learning about what a good relationship is and how to have one. And there's more and more possibility that we learn how to create one. And that means that we learn how to create more stable families for our kids.
Yeah, and the more we understand the idea of what makes a lovely match, the more self-knowledge, the more understanding of the brain, the more understanding of how to move through power struggles into this delicious place that we've described of mutual healing and growth and reconnecting. And I mean, there's so much brilliant information that has emerged, that is emerging, and that has yet to emerge, that will just make relationships be able to be framed in a way that induces maybe more optimism than I see as well.
That's right. As long as we don't make terrible mistakes. Like, I was reading an article the other day that said women are making progress because they are now refusing to rely on men, and they are allowing themselves to do all the things that men have done in the past, like have lots of affairs and, be kind of cougarish in their sexuality.
Yeah, I think it's misascribing empowerment too. I think there's a whole movement around empowerment with women being labeled as this sort of sexual acting out as some version of empowerment.
It's a mistake. It's like it's no.
Well, I think it's misguided, and I think it's actually quite dangerous because
so do I.
In so many ways, women in a context, in a culture that basically sent messages of disempowerment to them. They thought, well, one way that I know I have cars crashing on the street is when I wear a short skirt. So there is some power in my sexuality. So I'm going to focus on that.
That's
as opposed to them realizing how multitudinous they are as creatures, and that there's so many elements of intelligence and power, and that singular animal sexual piece is one piece of 100,000 pieces of what makes a female body, or a male body, frankly. So much of this applies to both genders in my experience, but obviously within patriarchy, women exploiting their own sexuality as a way to declare to the world that they're a feminist or that they're empowered, I think is really dangerous.
So do I. And it robs men. What we see in therapy is that men, if you really talk to them about their sexuality, you don't see this sensitivity in any of the media portrays of male sexuality that I see, where men turn and say, you think I just want an orgasm. You think I just want physical release.
Right.
But what I want to feel desired. That's what I want. Mm-hmm. And good Lord, that's exactly what his lady wants too. So, it's interesting, that men have been put in this sort of strange box. Yeah.
Yes. Really reduced, actually. Both genders have been reduced in this whole conversation.
That's right. Hey, we're dealing with love, sexuality, and who human beings are. That's a pretty.
I love the small talk with you.
Conversation, Alanis.
Yes, we kept it light today, Sue. I'm so grateful to you for being able to just go for it and do the deep dive with me. God bless you. And I feel honored to know you and to be able to have these kinds of conversations with you. And I'm just excited for where you're going, and as your consciousness evolves and as your frontline investigations continue, and the articles and pieces that you write and new books that I know that have been swimming around in your consciousness take form. I think it's a fortunate world to have brains and hearts and souls like you in it, sharing your wisdom. So God bless you. Thank you so much for being here with me.
You're most welcome. It's been amazing fun. Thank you for having me.
Oh,
bless you.
Too. Bless you. Thank you, everyone, for listening. It's a joy to share these podcasts with you. I invite you to subscribe and join me on the next podcast. And until then, take care. And I'll see you soon. Conventional, kid, all intense.